What I want to start with here is obviously the big conversation, that whole vegetarian versus meats. I'm certainly not making a competition. I don't want to find a winner. At the end of the day, what I'm looking for is just trying to give you a couple facts, give you a couple things that allow you to, oh, nice video going, to get an awareness of how we can help you move forward, right? So it's not me or Shannon telling you how to eat. It's simply bringing a couple of facts to the table of what we've seen work better with clients, what might be some suggestions that you haven't taken into account. And I think the reason this is really important to come up now is because there's a lot of those movings like the Game Changers and every other one that's come out after that has been quite heavily focused and leaning one side, that sometimes it can be challenging to really get true information. So I do want to find something a bit more in the middle and make sure that we can bring a bigger picture to this. Okay, so as we mentioned, that second point there, what is wrong with the way people approach diets? I think the biggest thing there is, they're more seeking the community, more seeking the emotional connection to being accepted than really following a diet for how it serves their body. And maybe that's a bit deep for today, but
Yeah.
I certainly see that a lot for how people approach diets. And I think, to be honest, like the culture we're building inside this community is like, we don't follow a diet, and that's our community, right? Like, we're finding what serves us, we're improving our gut health, we're getting energy back on track, and finding that that's really becoming our blueprint, our way of eating, rather than, if someone asks you what you're eating, the best answer should be, what fucking works, right? Like, it's not paleo, it's not vegetarian, whatever. It's like, I'm making these tweaks because I'm being intelligent around the choices that really fuel my body. And that's kind of the big overarching theme of how we should really be eating, right? I want to dive into what changes as we get older, right? If something used to work in your 20s and things are not responding like they used to, and you're finding, you're a bit uncertain around how you should be eating, why things aren't working the same way, I do want to cover some really key concepts that will be helpful for you today. So stick around with that one. Dive into a couple misconceptions. We kind of already touched on them there, but I certainly want to dive in and just make sure you're not kept in the dark with these, because this is very much an area that is quite polarized by a particular opinion, and it can be quite hard to get the full picture. Again, with the toxins in the body from our food, what we consume through our mouth is where a lot of those toxins come in. Massive amount of toxicity in the air, the water, the things we use around the house, but really the biggest one that is affecting our body and the way we look, feel, and function are from the foods we eat. So we want to be aware of some of these toxins here. And then I want to just tie that up with a bit of awareness around, okay, Ollie, now what should I be eating, right? Shannon, what should I be eating? What parts of those should I be focusing on? And how can I make better informed decisions regardless of what route I decide to take? Okay, so there is a lot today. I thought this was a great topic to cover. We've touched on it a couple of times before, and there's been a bit of backlash, there's been a bit of a helpful conversation, and at the end of the day, if we're bringing awareness to a bigger picture and having intelligent conversations, that's a massive part of this group. All right, so I want to dive in with this one and just get an awareness of that first point. Is I think we already had that conversation here, but just trying to make sure that what we choose to eat, what we select on our plate is really, if we bring awareness to that and it's actually serving our body with some sort of purpose, right? Like, is it fueling our brain? Are we getting better energy during the day? Is it showing up in our recovery? Then that's really something that should allow us to select better options, right? If we're noticing that we're more fatigued and our energy is a little low, maybe we should add a little bit more protein in there. Or if hormonally we feel like things aren't functioning, we feel like our mood is dipping and diving, whatever else comes up, maybe the joints are getting really achy. A lot of the time we see people aren't getting enough fats in their diet. So that could be a really, really important part there as well. Okay. So understanding what we should be covering, what we should be adding in there is really important. Was there anything you want to add there, Shannon?
No, I think that's it. Like it's covered it pretty well. Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the joints and the achiness, because I've even seen it as a PT. Like, you'll see a client who's got something wrong, and it's not until you actually, like, you can do so many kinds of rehab and all of that jazz, but when you actually look at the diet, you start adding more fats in, and that actually changes things. And even I experienced that with my hips a few years ago. I was seeing surgeons and trying everything, and I thought I had to have hip surgery. And I actually started adding more fats into my diet. No shit, like, it helped a lot. So a lot can come back to nutrition.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've obviously, I've coined you the name Shannon, Mrs. Eatmore, because
Yeah.
with all our clients for a couple of weeks, we were literally be like, look, you're not eating enough. Like once we start
Yeah.
eating the right foods and we're fueling our body, we actually start getting this working at a higher level, right? And it was like you're saying, like more fats in the diet, getting that protein up. Like Shannon just like, eat more, let's get this working.
And it works though. It doesn't
It does.
backfire.
100%. And the biggest thing coming through is that energy component, right? Like really getting
Yeah.
people functioning at a high level. So it's massive there. And again, that comes into that third point. Like, how are you measuring that? Like, are you feeling good? Is your recovery there? Like all these questions you're asking on those coaching calls is this awareness of like really getting some tangible metrics behind that rather than being stuck on that one way of eating. Cool. Mo's just asking, we've got a ton of people on here. Great to see everyone here. Old Ash, Duncan, Zeke. Mo, you had a question. Cool. Weight loss goal. What's your recommendation for types of carb intake, if any? Usually I keep it high fat in the morning. You've been a client there. No carbs, minor carb intake in the Arvo. Now I know this will depend on who it is and how they perform. I'm asking regarding clients aged 30 to 40 years old, around the 80 to 100. Well, again, it's very dependent on the client. Hey, Paul, hey, Wade. So it would simply be, let me know your thoughts on this, Shannon. Maybe it's eat more, but try to make sure that if we get that sorted, we certainly use, we are pro fats. It's certainly not full keto. We do want to make sure that we do have some carbohydrate in there. I think removing one food group or one macronutrient or whatever entirely is rather silly. Unless obviously this is a conversation today, eating meat, but trying to make sure that adding more fat in the first part of the day is certainly really helpful at making sure from a hormonal level things are working. And we dive into this a lot from a metabolic flexibility standpoint, making sure that most people can actually use fats as fuel. If I'm assuming if they're up 100 kilos plus, it's probably not all muscle. So I'm assuming that if they're looking at 25% plus body fat, their chances of being able to use fats as fuel very well or having that level of metabolic flexibility is not going to be there. So doing a bit more fat in the first part of the day is a really, really great way to reprogram that in a way. We use a lot of strategies there, and obviously of some of them as being a past client for sure. But I guess there's a lot more aspects to that would be included. I think, again, this is very much a spectrum where this is, again, whether it would be whether you eat meats or whether you're a vegetarian, it's kind of more on a sliding scale of do we work better on more protein and fats to more carbohydrate, right? So the age is certainly part of it. The weight is certainly part of it. If you are in those 40s, 50s and you're over 100 kilos, then, that's probably going to be leaning more towards the protein and fats, to be honest, but trying to make sure that we really work with the client and understand their needs rather than just giving a blanket recommendation. But I hope that helps. Would you add anything there?
Yeah, I think that's good. And it just again depends on the carb choices. I think a lot of people, they just lump carbs in like, oh, carbs are a thing, but it's like, yes, it is, but there's so many types, like if you're comparing, say, quinoa to white bread, both of those are carbs.
Yeah.
And even broccoli, it's still a carb, but it's the way that it digests in the body. And I think that's what is really important, that people, you do take ownership of your own plan. And again, what is working for you and understanding like why that carbohydrate is good for you, or, why to switch. But yeah, I mean, I'm always a fan of like complex carbs. Like I say to everyone, like complex carbs with everything. It's the best kind, and it helps with sleep, it helps with everything. And also too, it is an interesting point. I actually trialed on myself recently because again, I follow what this is. So we go, high protein, high fat, and then I have the carbs at dinner. Just for fun the other day, I was like, I'm just going to try and have carbs earlier in the day. And I'm just going to see if I feel any different. No jokes. I've been hungry the whole day, like changed nothing else. So it does just show you that, yes, having high fat and high protein makes a massive difference to your hormones, because the minute you change something, you notice it.
Yeah, and obviously, like just to go the other way as well, like we don't have an exact framework. There's certainly suggestions we have. We've got a couple of clients recently we've said they actually work better on carbohydrates, right? Whether that be their activity load, whether that simply be from a genetic level, it's certainly not going to be a one size fits all program. And that's exactly why we're talking about this. That's just how we eat. This is how we fuel our body and feel great, rather than like you need to eat this way. But it can certainly be a nice way to start. How does your body really tolerate fats? Because if you're getting sleepy every time you have a meal, then there's certainly something deeper we need to look into there. So
Yeah.
that does certainly dive into that fourth point here as well, around how long you're really running that test. So like we said before, if it's something that you go on vegetarian or you change your diet, you know, there could be a change up where you're just simply more aware of your foods, you're removing stuff that you would typically just automatically eat, or you're moving foods that you've been over consuming a long time. Then you're seeing a lot of people, you know, on that vegetarian and vegan, to be honest, that they are feeling really good in the short term. And that's great, right? They're filling the body, that's really good. I have seen a lot of studies there where it's kind of like this massive adrenaline rush and their body's like, where the fuck's all this quality food? And then when they get to that 6-week mark, they tend to slow down. But hey, we've had clients stick around on vegetarian for a long time, typically leaner or younger clients. I don't see it as much with the older clients being able to manage that long term, but certainly running that as a long-term test and understanding, you know, if things start to change, then your diet needs to change. Like if you're from winter to summer, a basic suggestion is less vitamin D exposure. You're probably going to tolerate carbohydrates less, right? So that's probably going to change how you select your diet, right? And knowing that a vegetarian diet, in order to hit even your protein goals, is certainly going to have to be more carbohydrate dominant, right? So that might mean automatically you're going to have to select a little bit more cardio in your diet. You're going to have to really make sure that you are choosing, again, that high complex carbohydrates. I think regardless, you should be doing that anyway. But just really understanding how long you're running that test, all right? So the last one there, even if it worked then, if it works in your 20s, what's working now could be completely different, right? That could go for the way you train, that could be for the way you study, that could be for the way you eat, right? So understanding if you're following a certain diet like your keto or your Atkins or Banting as it's called in South Africa, I seem to be talking a lot of South Africans, and then you try that again in your 40s, then, you know, something might be a little bit different, right? You might need a bit more carbohydrate, or might just maybe more variety. Or if you tried vegetarian later and you felt good for a while, you got off it and then you came back on it later, it's still, you can't use that metric as, even though it was you, it's still the same person. You're a very different person than you were 10 years ago, right? So you're not following a diet because Ollie does it. You're not following a diet because how you used to eat. It's really a case of how do we set this experiment for where we are right now, objectively, what's working and what can we change?
Yeah.
Right. Cool. Anything where I change there?
No, I like that. It's interesting about, like, yeah, changing, like what used to work for you that's not always going to work. And I think when people accept that, that's when they actually start to make leaps and bounds, because it's so common. And I've seen it in clients. It's a classic of, oh, you know, I used to do this and I've done this before and it worked for me, or, you know, and it's like, but that's not where you're at now, you know? So, and life changes all the time, you know, your work changes, your stresses in life change, how you approach things and your mindset. So yeah. I think always having an open mind to, like, reflect where you're at now is the most important thing.
100%. And I think a big point on that as well is the hardest bit of it is you only know what you know, right? Like if there's something you don't bring into awareness or you haven't tried in the past, right? Like the collagen thing's been or just introduction of some level of glycine into people's diet has been a massive thing for their energy, their joints, their gut, whatever else. And, you know, that's why I invest so much into coaches. I literally paid $1,500 to get on the phone for an hour with someone the other day, because I'm like, dude, there's something I don't know here. You are the expert in this field. What can you tell me that I'm missing, right? And that's where I think sometimes that second pair of eyes comes in, or having someone in your corner that isn't, you know, in that day-to-day, that can really help you maybe step out, see the bigger picture. What are you missing? What can you really add in, right? I really, personally, I value that really, really highly, and why I've always got a coach in my corner while I'm coaching others, while I'm always asking for Shannon's opinion. What could I do better? What could we change? What am I missing? I think that's always a big part of how you run those tests, making sure that there is that objective view and you're not being stuck in those emotions or day-to-day without seeing that bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So let's dive into what happens when we get older. We all know that's good fun. So the main three here, I'm going to keep this one really simple, but typically this is what we see. And obviously we've worked with 200 clients inside this program already. And obviously before that, both me and Shannon have worked in a PT and coaching setting for a very, very long time. And what we see with that as we tend to get older, obviously it's the main thing that I'm going to stick to today is simply that awareness that protein synthesis tends to decrease, right? A big part, I'll give you 3 things for longevity, is we want to make sure that we can hold on to muscle mass, we can keep our grip strength, and we can keep our walking speed, right? You can research that one later, but those are some of those 3 key elements of looking at our body from a longevity standpoint. Are we healthy? Are we going to really live a long time, right? If we start to slow down, our walking gait patterns start to slow down, we start to drop a lot of muscle mass, that's all pretty bad news, okay? So a big part of that is trying to make sure that we can really increase this protein synthesis in the body. We do need, obviously, more protein in the diet, okay? So if you're eating whatever the government standards is, like 40, 50 grams a day, it's absolutely dismal. We want to make sure everyone at minimum is having 100 grams of protein, okay? We're not looking at giving you to weigh it out and make sure it's perfect, but we need to have a pretty good awareness of at least 100 grams in the day, okay? If we're starting to exercise more, if we're looking at getting a good feedback from recovery, we obviously want to increase that. So if you're in your 50s, 60s plus, I'd be pushing that up a little bit higher too, okay? The next part here is, as Shannon mentioned, I think most people are not eating enough, but certainly as you're getting older, for that proper cholesterol function, again, this could be a whole nother topic, but cholesterol is necessary for proper hormone function. So if you're seeing testosterone drop down, you're starting to see your hormones really fade. Fat is a massive part of that. Not to mention, obviously, regulating insulin. You want to make sure you've got a really modulated level of that glucose stores as well, or sorry, blood sugar levels. So we want to make sure that with that diet, having a bit more fat in that is certainly going to modulate that better. We're going to keep that brain function. We're going to make sure that our energy is a bit more consistent. So typically, again, that's where we come back to and why that's a key part of our framework. Typically, not always, is making sure that we do get a bit more protein in the diet. It's certainly going to help in a lot of different ways, and then making sure there's a bit more fat there too, okay? Now, obviously the last one, and I'll get Shannon to expand on this if she's got anything extra, is just this idea of less carbohydrates, right? So we certainly use this from an athlete standpoint. The basic idea is, obviously, the more you train, the more you get more carbohydrate you can probably tolerate. But again, as you get older, how much you tolerate is certainly going to change. So you might have felt like you get away with a lot more in the past. That's probably going to lower a bit more. So how you rejig that diet really has to be quite personal to you. How much training volume are you doing? If that changes, right? If you're doing a lot of running, you go to a lot of weights, that's probably going to change. If you're sleeping well, you're obviously going to get away with a lot more too. So it comes back to this overall health. We can ramp up your hormones. We can get Shannon to tell you to eat more and really make sure that overall our body's really functioning as a whole. But typically this is what we've found.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's super important. And I think people need to be aware of not being afraid of fat. Like, it's definitely better than what it used to be. Because I was actually talking to a client about this today. Like, there used to be this whole thing around fat's bad, and I feel like slowly the world is becoming better at understanding, no, it's more the sugar we want to, and again, it's not like one thing is bad. It's not like anything, it's consuming too much of one thing, which most people do with sugar, obviously.
Yeah.
So but I think not being afraid of consuming fat, because it is good for you, and you will feel so much better for it. And sometimes when you actually increase your fat, you end up losing body fat, because now all of a sudden, especially for ladies, because it's like you're actually nourishing your hormones, so things can actually start ticking along. And that is,
we do that a lot, right? Like a couple of clients the other day, we did a testimonial with Nicole, is that idea of like 1,300 calories doesn't work. This is a coach she's working with in the past. 1,300 calories didn't work. Cool, we'll take it to 900 and we'll see what happens, right? Like, things start breaking down. Like, your immune system doesn't work, your hormones don't work, right? So one of the first thing we did was like, let's fuel that body. Let's get more color, more nutrients into your diet. Fuck it, put it at 1,600, see how you go. No, not enough, go 1,800. Like, let's fuel this body. Oh, look, we're losing body fat. We've got more energy. We're sleeping properly. Like, what's going on, right? So really getting back to, like you said, just building this level of health is so much more important than just suppressing things down.
Yeah, 100%. And like, you just have to trust the process, because I know that for a lot of people, it can be a really confronting thing to think, what, I have to eat more, or what, I have to put on fat, if that's what your coach is telling you to do. Sorry, I have to eat more fat. But it's like, yes, you just have to trust it, because, like we're saying this because we know it works and we've seen it. And I've seen it time and time again. Like, you tell someone to eat more based off the current situation and they drop body fat, or they start increasing their lean muscle mass, or they start sleeping better. And it's just because, sometimes we get stuck in our own heads, and you need the outside eye to be able to see that.
100%, yeah, and it's not like we're just telling you to eat more, right? Like it's certainly the specifics of the right food as well. So,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we get that sleep back on track, we start to make sure you're calming that nervous system down and getting better quality sleep. Obviously, we're taking into consideration your gut, what's actually going to work, what's inflaming that. Obviously, that's a big toxicity conversation we've had in the past. And then we can really, if we're getting that body refined, we're getting things working, then just bumping up that food and really fueling the body is going to make a big difference, right? So there's certainly intricacies to that, but I think as a nice starting point, this really needs to be taken into account, right? Really take into consideration that you don't need to drop one meal out of the day. Most people call it fasting. We call it not having breakfast. You're missing one of those meals from the day. We probably want to make sure that we look at how can we get things back on track, fuel that body and get things really functioning at its peak. Cool. So that kind of ties into the concept, obviously, as you mentioned, with like getting more fats in the diet, what's bad, what's not. These are a couple of misconceptions that I thought we'd cover, really just clear the air with some of these that do continue to come up. And as Sharon said, I think the fat conversation is certainly getting better, but the amount of surgeons and cardiac doctors that I keep talking to that are still saying saturated fat should be removed from the diet is quite interesting. So trying to, or even cholesterol, to be honest, I think the awareness here is trying to make sure we can get our body working as a whole. Okay, what makes saturated fat bad is when you're combining it with sugar, right? The best way to put fat on as quickly as possible, if that's anyone's goal, by the way, is to have sugar and saturated fat together. Okay, if you remove the sugar and you allow the body to actually assimilate saturated fat properly, your body will use that quite well. We probably don't want to go over 30% of your diet, your fat intake of saturated fat. That's where we start to maybe run into a couple of issues, and not massive issues, but it's not going to be the healthiest approach. But if we keep the sugars out of those diets, it's going to be much better. Okay, so saturated fat itself is really, really vital for a lot of functions of the body. It certainly needs to be in the diet, but as soon as you start slapping a whole lot of sugar into it, it's one of the easiest ways to put fat on. It's the easiest ways to really fuck with your insulin sensitivity and run into further health complications there, right? So it's more a case of what you're combining in there. Obviously, as you can see with naturally a lot of meats, there's going to be a lot of saturated fat in there. And this is maybe where that sort of demonizing fat meat consumption has come up is, oh, well, it's got saturated fat and it must be bad. Well, it's like, as long as you don't slap it into a burger, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so starting with that, all right? Now, the second one here, obviously that was our initial conversation, I believe we had from Mark, thanks for that, was this idea of is vegetarian or meat consumption healthier? And I think as a nice starting point, I want to make sure that I'm saying neither is healthier, because at the end of the day, it comes down to how you eat, what you select in the way of food choices, right? If you're choosing a bunch of soy, you're choosing a bunch of fake meats, you're certainly not doing all that way. If you're getting your meat consumption from a happy meal, then that's probably not healthy either, right? So getting awareness of how you tidy that up and look at healthier, you've got to look at the bigger concept, right? Get away from the attachment to a diet being healthy, and what does that really look like? Because there's certainly a good way to eat vegetarian, there's certainly a good way to eat meat consumption. Hey, there might be a good way to eat vegan, but I certainly haven't found it yet. So trying to get awareness of that healthy, get that base, and really try to find something that works for you. All right. So like I said before, it's certainly that sliding scale. We've had clients that have done really well. Maybe if it's just even for short periods of time, right? We've seen, we haven't done it personally with our clients, but I've certainly seen a lot of pretty good studies where people have gone on even a carnivore diet or they've gone on a vegetarian diet for 4 to 6 weeks. And from a gut level, it's actually been quite beneficial from them, right? But it's certainly not something that they sink their teeth into and say, right, well, this is me till I'm 80, right? You've got to get an awareness of what's going to work for you right now. What are we repairing? What are we serving? You know, if we want to go, we're getting into exams or we're getting into a really high, heavy workload and we're not training a lot, right? If I'm really trying to do a lot of deep work, I'm trying to use my brain more, then I'm probably going to go a little bit more high fat on the diet. I'm not going to put as much carbohydrate in there. Whereas if I'm really, training for a marathon as I do, at 100 kilos, then I'd probably add in a bit more carbohydrate to that diet, right? So it's a sliding scale, both for the individual and also for the type of activity, the amount of stress that we're having in your diet and in your life. Before I carry on and ramble there, was there anything you want to add there?
No, I think that's good. Like like we said earlier, especially about the vegetarian, there is such a strong idea around being healthier, just don't eat meat. And
Yeah.
I say to people now, I'm like, why? And they don't even answer. So I'm like, why? I challenged my auntie the other day because she had a similar thing. And I was like, why? And people don't know. And that's why I'm saying, it's so good for people to start actually educating themselves on that and actually, you realize, you get to a point, you're like, no, it's where we're getting the foods we're like eating from. Any diet at all could be healthy, or any diet could not be healthy. Again, it's the combinations, and it's where you're getting the foods from, and it's about educating yourself on that.
100%. Yeah, and a big part of that I didn't add in here that I thought would be quite interesting is a lot of these like bodybuilders and stuff that are coming through, right? That are vegan bodybuilders. I'm like, those guys built that muscle on meat, right? No doubt about it at all. You're not going to build a substantial amount of muscle and stay lean or stay healthy on a vegetarian diet. You might do it initially and then you'll switch across. That's great. You'll certainly drop a bit of body fat if we're cleaning up the diet and we're being healthy, right? Again, we can do it on meat or not, because we're being more conscious about what we're eating, regardless of what diet it is. That's going to be beneficial. But building a lot of muscle, a lot of these guys have, built that muscle. They've built what's happening. They've switched across to vegetarian, and maybe they've felt really good, which is great for them. If that just works, then that's awesome. Or maybe they were, over consuming. They were overdoing, like a lot of bodybuilders, right? We see you get really intolerant to chicken, for example. If you take that out of your diet, you're going to feel pretty good, right? It's just that level of inflammation in the gut. So whatever that looks like, and again, like I said, that could be a really good option if we see that someone's really overdoing, they're being on carnivore and all they ate was shrimp and chicken. We'd probably remove those two things from their diet and start again. I don't know why I choose those meats, but starting there and really build you back up is going to be helpful, right? Again, this comes into that removal or replacement of food groups and really understanding at a deeper level, how is your gut really working? Is there an intolerance that we need to take into account first? That's not diet-based, that's just simple health and making sure that gut works, okay? Now, I got a little bit of a bone to pick with this next one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but meat consumption is not killing the earth, right? These whole farting cows and everything's breaking down because cows are farting is not going to be the big reason for the earth exploding, right? I'm sorry, at the end of the day, that is an invalid reason. There's tons of, obviously, things like the cars on the road, the pollution coming from a commercial level is a very real thing. Looking at global warming, I know that's a real thing. I'm not going down that route for sure, but trying to make sure that meat consumption there actually being the reason for it is a ridiculous conversation, okay? There's a lot of malpractices both in the meat consumption industry and in the vegetarian industry, and both of them, honestly, I really wish that they would, obviously we can improve them, but it's certainly not just that meat consumption. A lot of these pea farms, they're absolutely obliterating farms, right? They're breaking down, they're getting rid of a lot of trees, they're getting rid of a lot of these insect and rabbit sort of areas. And what they're doing, obviously, is instead of putting cows on that land, they're just putting a bunch of pea. And because that's rotating through and there's a lot of commercial level extraction needed there, then that's not very good on the earth either, right? So to be honest, both of them are, there could be better ways of doing it, but meat consumption itself is killing the earth. To be honest, it is just invalid. Do you want to dive into that next point?
The next point about vegetarian not being cheaper?
Yeah.
Yes, so I can say this because that was me. The biggest thing probably to be honest, the one thing I was scared about the most when I actually switched back to eating meat was obviously, I was a student, I was studying two things, I was working next to nothing, and StudyLink don't look after students these days, or back then. And my biggest fear was, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to afford to eat because meat is so expensive, right? I kid you not, it pretty much works out to be the same. It works out to be the same because even if you're doing a vegetarian diet on a healthy-ish plan, the best you can, if you're doing that, you want to be going for sprouted nuts and seeds and everything. That shit is not cheap. It's not. Anyone could go down to Y Cicada in Auckland and they'll tell you that it's not a cheap meal out. So, and even if you're going for fake meats, if you're someone down that path, again, it's actually not cheap. So, a block of tofu itself might be about $5 minimum, and that's maybe 1.5 serves. So there is this massive idea around meat being expensive, but it's really not. Again, it depends on where you look for your meat. Ideally we try to say go for organic and stuff if you can, and I know that is quite a challenge in terms of like affordability these days. But one thing I have found just from like looking around at local butchers is if you go down to your butcher and you talk to them, they often can do really good deals, better than the supermarkets, because their meat is proper quality. So by the time you've actually cooked the meat, you haven't wasted like all this water, like if you were to buy from, say, the supermarket or whatnot. So it actually works out to be the same in terms of cost. if you were not eating the meat, if you're going for a plant-based option, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's just my personal experience. I found that it's vegetarian is not cheaper. I think people think it's cheaper because they're like, I'm cutting out a food group. I'm not, by me not buying meat, therefore I don't have to buy meat, so therefore I'm not spending that money.
My
But what
body's
they
just
don't
not going to break
actually,
down.
what
Yeah.
was that, sorry?
My body's just going to be able to handle the fact that I'm taking out a vital nutrients because it's cheaper on my wallet.
Well, that's just it, right? So people think, oh, I'm just going to remove the chicken. And I'm like, well, that's great. But what are you actually going to replace that chicken with? If you replace that with, say, a vegetarian or vegan protein powder, again, it's not the cheapest of proteins out there. So, you know, it is a good quality one, but it's not the cheapest. So again, it's just like, yeah, you could do that, but we could say, oh, well, you know, we could remove anything and it's going to be cheaper.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last one here in regards to the food side of things, I'm not going to spend too long on this. We have been chatting away for a while, but the last one in regards to getting everything food, I think supplementation, unfortunately, you know, again, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it was making sure that at this stage there is, you know, like what's missing from the soil, what we need to get our body functioning. As I think Shannon mentioned before, if you're doing vegetarian, you're gonna need B12. You just simply don't get it from your diet. But things like magnesium, things like selenium, things like zinc are so low in today's society, and obviously definitely correlates into this level of hormone function, energy, and a lot of disruptions that are going on there, that really do need to be supplemented with. So, you know, regardless of what you're on, whether it be meat, vegetarian, vegan, there's going to be some level of supplementation needed. I think, again, you know, 2 to 3 supplements at max are going to cover that. I don't think you need to be doing 10 to 15 to be healthy, but there are some bases that you need to cover. And again, don't just guess with that. Diving into blood work and getting things at proper markers is certainly really helpful. But if you are doing that vegetarian, especially vegan, you are going to have to fill that gap somehow, right? And a big thing, especially from the vegetarian and the vegan side of things, is, to be honest, unless you absolutely nail it and you're absolutely meticulous with what protein sources you get, you're always going to be deficient in a couple of those amino acids, specifically glycine, along with a couple others. But that's a big one I've seen that, you know, we tend to recommend a lot through our collagen proteins, through the bone broth and these other, you know, organ meats. If you're into that, I can't handle it, but trying to make sure that that base is set, it certainly has to be some level of supplementation. If you are going to take the route of vegetarian or vegan, and if you want to do it at some level healthy, then you're going to have to put in some supplementation, whether that be from the amino acid profiles, whether that be from the B12. It's actually not so much the iron, unless there's an absorption issue, which we're seeing come through a bit more now. And from things like nuts, from the toxicities or toxins I want to go through next. But there is going to have to be some supplementation regardless of what diet there is, if you want to really function and be feeling your best and optimized at that level. So I think it is misconception. Maybe that was true maybe 100, 150 years ago, because our soils and our farming practices in general were much better. But certainly now that magnesium and zinc as your main two certainly need to be added, plus diving into any deficiencies you may personally have.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so these ones we're going to dive into a bit more. Now, I was going to leave this for our private clients, but I thought I'd give you a goodie today. This is one that really does give you an awareness of what's going on in the vegetables. And I won't spend too long on this, but this is certainly what Shannon was talking about in the past, where if you're eating veggies, all right, and you feel maybe run down, you feel sick, you feel not your best, logic would tell you, well, you know, you'd be healthy, eat more veggies, right? Eat more fruits, eat more veggies. But that can really be sometimes an issue. And if there's a lot of gut dysbiosis coming through, there's a lot of informational issues there. A lot of the time, I am seeing that come through with things like that spinach and kale, with those raw veggies coming through. So the second one here, those oxalates, a lot of those raw veggies, those toxins that are coming through are really, really damaging on the gut. So starting with getting an awareness of these four, and what I don't want to do is, you know, be like, oh, well, what the hell do I have left to eat? But it's certainly something to be aware of. If you dive into the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, that's a great place to start. It's a sort of a government guideline of what foods have been most covered in pesticides and toxins. But as an awareness of those foods, every animal, every living thing, right? Like vegetables are obviously, well, we're still living when they're in the ground. It's not like you know, they still have a protective mechanism there. And obviously, because they don't have horns or teeth, their protective mechanism is these toxins, these lectins. Okay, so if you are eating a lot of raw vegetables, you are letting a lot of these things coming through, and it's your body's not tolerating it well, it can really have a lot of detrimental effects. Okay, so looking at those lectins, looking at high lectin foods, looking at how you can maybe cook your foods better in order to remove a little bit more of these lectins, more of the oxalates. Spinach and kale are notorious for being really, really high in them and can be really disruptive with gut issues. You know, they're fantastic foods, but if they're coming from the wrong areas, like kale, for example, is being used to soak up mercury in certain areas, right? Like it's the way it just absorbs this stuff is really, really interesting. The third one, which is obviously the issue we seem to come through a bit more from the vegetarian side, is obviously how can you get your protein without doing a lot of grains, with a lot of nuts, a lot of legumes. It can be quite hard to do, but what we're seeing come through with low iron absorption or something coming through there is these phytates, right? And if you're doing a lot of grains, a lot of nuts, a lot of seeds, especially the nuts, we're seeing that it really affects your ability to absorb other nutrients, right? So it's actually coming up in things like soy as well. That's one of the big issues outside of estrogen disruption that is coming with soy. If you're doing too much of the nuts, right? You're doing a lot of almonds, you're doing a lot of walnuts, you're doing whatever, like they're all quote unquote healthy, but if they're a massive component of your diet and they're your main source of protein, that can really disrupt other areas and cause an absorption issue. So if you are seeing things like iron that are constantly low, even though you're supplementing with it or something's coming through, that's something that you could certainly look into. Okay, and then the last one here with the mytoxins, it's really more a case of, like, again, if you're doing coffee, this is where we would really make sure that you are getting it like really high quality organic coffee. You're doing plunger stuff, you're not doing the crap out of McCafe on the way through, will make a big difference to this mold that you're getting, right? So getting an awareness of where that comes in. It tends to be more a lot of plants, your grains, and your coffee. It seems I missed a tea on there, to try and make sure that things are working. Okay, so getting really, again, this just kind of comes back to high quality foods. Make sure that you are washing your foods, you're cooking them rather than having too much raw, and then things like coffee, if you are having that, you are going for that high quality. If you're in America, then you might need to buy something from New Zealand because you don't have high quality over there. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's good. It pretty much sums it up.
Cool. You're just laughing at me, but hopefully I'm saying.
I'm just laughing because you're so brutal. We're so honest. Get Kiwi coffee.
Yeah. Oh, that's coming directly from mine. That's not really my opinion because I'm still not a coffee connoisseur. But anyway. Cool. So the last one I kind of want to touch on today to wrap everything up, and let me know if you want to add anything, Shannon. But the big one here with the quality side of things, we've told you a lot here. Maybe we've hopefully given you something to think about and to go away with. But at the end of the day, you've got to vote with your wallets, right? If you can choose that higher quality, you can, like Shannon said, go to the butcher and get high quality meats that are actually specialized there rather than the pale shit that's supposedly chicken in the supermarket. Get an awareness of what you can really choose. And really vote that way, right? Make sure that you are choosing sustainably farmed options. You are getting that grass-fed, organic, wherever you can, to make sure we are getting the high quality in. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it certainly requires a little bit more awareness on your side. Yes, pay the extra $2 for the meat that's, is free range rather than the grain-fed chicken. What they eat is what you eat. So if they're having a bunch of shit and they're not getting out of a cage, that is going to make a big difference to the toxicity, the toxins, and the lack of nutrients that your body is consuming, right? So even though if you're eating meats, but it's that low quality, that's going to have a real issue. If you're choosing a lot of these soys and fake meats and bullshit on a vegetarian diet, that's going to really show up in how you feel and look as well, okay? So regardless of what side you really lean on this, at the end of the day, this is really an awareness of what fuels you, how do you feel great, and making sure that sustainability and ethics side of things, it's not going to be leaning towards vegetarian or meats. It's simply vote with the foods that really fuel your body. You're understanding that practice, right? In New Zealand, there's been a couple of things going around with like, understand where your meats came from. I don't think that really caught on because nobody wanted to know their lamb's name, but I think getting awareness of, was it actually cooked properly? Was it farmed properly? Was it killed properly even, right? Making sure that things are, like those home kills, they're just doing their thing and then they're out to it. They didn't feel any pain. Everything went chill rather than going through a full meatworks factory. That's, again, something you can vote with, right? That ability to be ethical with the meats you choose, being sustainable with the veggies you get, where you get them from the markets, whatever you eat there. is certainly going to be really valuable regardless of which way you go, and will certainly serve your body, your energy, your overall health at such a high level. So if you bring that awareness to that quality factor, regardless of what way, is always going to be a key part of this.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. And again, I think it's like, just saying, but even if you do have to pay a $2 extra, you think about that, but it's like, how much could that save you in the long run, right? Like, it's just that little change, but will make such a big difference. And your food actually tastes better. People go, oh, eating healthy, does it taste any good? I'm like, well, yeah, it does if you pick the right foods. Like, you can taste the difference. Even free range eggs, you can taste and visually see the difference in the yolks to eggs that have been like battery farmed,
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, and like you said with the water content as well, right? Like, you pay the $2 extra, but you don't.
But half of it's water.
Exactly.
Seriously, it's, so you'd like, well, you're probably paying more for that actually when you drain out all the water. Like, it's shocking. And getting the hormones and all that. So yeah.
100%. I think that's, did I have more? That was the last one. Okay, so yeah, just to finish off, I thought that was the last slide. I obviously wrote my slides and then forgot about them. So yeah, like, if where you are right now, the big thing we want to look back to is simply that objective focus of, am I feeling good? Am I good with what I'm doing on my diet? If I am, then fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. If you do feel low, you do feel your energy's off, you don't feel like you're recovering like you used to, hopefully what we went through today can give you some awareness to what you can change, what you can maybe implement, what you could add or adjust to really allow you to move forward. And if you're really confused with what that is, you feel like you need someone in your corner, you're uncertain because there's so much fluff out there, and obviously please reach out. We can go through any questions. I'm happy to send any resources that help you there, or we can have a conversation around what working with us looks like. But just making sure that you look at the full picture, right? You're not going down, it's very easy to continue going down the rabbit hole of what you already know. But when you step back and look at, okay, what are these other areas that really make sense, right? How could I be wrong? What if I'm wrong? Okay, I try to ask that a lot, and hopefully get an awareness of, what if there's something that is really logical, it makes sense, and it can make me better, why the hell would I not put it in place, right? So if something from here is something you can add in, it allows you to show up better, be more healthy, be more energetic, and ultimately fuel your body, and that's really our main goal.